This is a panel on collaboration, and very pleased today to have Jack Herrick, my partner in the Red Clay Ramblers. He's a longtime artistic director of the band, and we've been all over the world together. Joy Goodwin is also from our faculty, has written for the New Yorker and the New York Times, and is a writer and producer for film and television. And our distinguished writer in residence this week, Mary Karr. Author of Liars Club and Sherry and Lit, and fairly recently a member of the songwriting community, something she said she would never do, with the idea brought to her about a decade ago. Collaboration, literally co-labor, working together. A lot of people think that means that on a given project they only have to do half as much work as they would otherwise. The math doesn't work that way. It's the same amount of work. You just got two folks hard at it and hoping that the whole is greater than the sum of parts. So we got all kinds of collaboration represented here: theater, film, song, and we're going to ask each of our panelists to say a few words for a few minutes, and after we hear from each, see what questions you all have and see where we want to go with this. Thanks for being here.
Why don't you start, big guy?
I've been appointed to start this, so I'm going to sit down. I was a songwriter minding my own, solo songwriter minding my own time in New York and back here in Chapel Hill in the early 70s, and Jim Wan, a friend of Jackson mine from college, said, "Let's write a musical about Jesse James." I said, "A musical? Are you kidding me?" He said, "Not a standard kind of musical, but our kind." So we took off and started writing this show, and I was about 25 or 6 at the time, so I've been collaborating for twice as many years as I have not been collaborating in my life. And that's my word.
That's your story?
That's your story.
Just about the whole
thing.
How about you, Mary Karr?
What an asshole. He brings me right up on the carpet. Well, I have not been collaborating for most of my life. I've been alone in a room in my pajamas like any decent writer. No, I mean, I was too ashamed to collaborate, to be honest with you. About 10 years ago, I met singer-songwriter Rodney Crowell, and he grew up close to where I grew up in East Texas, and he said, "You and I are going to write songs together," and I said, "Never happen." And he said, "Why?" And I said, "I don't do anything that I can be really humiliated at worse than I've already humiliated myself at everything else." So for me, the idea of saying the 900 stupid things that you have to say before you get to the good thing in front of somebody was too shameful. I just couldn't imagine having to embarrass myself in front of Rodney, who's a real songwriter. So I was like a cat with my claws around the edge of the door. And Rodney finally kind of sucked me in, which I can talk about more later. And I loved working with him so much. We collaborated on a record called Kin that came out last year. And we also collaborated with Nora Jones and Emmylou Harris and Lucinda Williams and Vince Gill and a bunch of other people came in and sang, and Chris Christopherson, Roseanne Cash, Lee Ann Womack came and sang on it for us. And then I've recently been working on television shows, first for HBO with a woman named Cynthia Moore, and for Showtime, and more recently AMC with a guy named Jacob Epstein on television shows.
I guess it's me. Well, I started off as a narrative nonfiction writer, and I guess about 7 or 8 years ago I started working in independent film, both as a screenwriter and a producer. And I've made about a dozen movies since that time, and been on a lot of sets and seen 200 people trying to make the same thing, which was a big shock after being by myself in my room. Although I must say sometimes it did seem seem easier for those 200 people to get something done than it seemed for me to write a page by myself. But I was very struck by some of the differences between collaborating on that scale and even collaborating in dance or in theater, other things that I know quite well from having written about them for years in New York. And you know, one thing I would just say about my exposure to film collaboration that I was kind of thinking about before coming here is that I really find that when you try to get many people to make the same thing, it can devolve into this thing kind of like Congress making a bill where nobody's happy. It's just everyone's equally miserable, and so that's it. But the better model is really, I love to watch jazz improvisers. I love to see the look on one guy's face while the other guy takes the solo. And that feeling of we each have something, we're going to add it, and what we can make together is the best version of the standard. And I was thinking, why is that possible sometimes and not others? And one thing I guess I would say is that having a standard that you're all improvising from is very useful. And the movies that I've worked on that have gone the most smoothly are the ones where the script is really a solid backbone for the movie. And so we all know what we're trying to make. And I guess it isn't just the script, it's also the director has a very specific vision of that script. And so that becomes our jazz standard, if you will, the thing that we're all working from. That we don't have to wake up every morning and say, hey, should we rewrite Take the A Train? Maybe the melody's not working. You know, so it really helps us, I think.
That's amazing. That's really interesting. I never knew that.
No, it's really, I completely changed my mind about what I want to say listening to you guys, because for the first thing is I really recognize the cat with their claws out, wanting to work through material almost endlessly on one's own rather than to get it out and have to justify it and explain it. I have a musical that I've been working on by myself for like 15 years. In the meanwhile, I've written dozens of other ones and finished them and had them produced. And when Bland told the story about going to New York to do Diamond Studs, the way that I got involved with Bland, although I knew him here at UNC, was I was a welder in Utah. And
well, of course.
The phone rang one evening, conveniently located right next to the bathtub where I was soaking, and it was Bland saying, somebody's quit our show. Did you know we had a show? We're in New York, we're doing Diamond Studs. And I said, I think I saw it on a magazine or something like that. And he said, well, this guy's quit and you're going to do it now, so you're going to come and lead the show. So I did. I drove to New York City and left my car in the outskirts of Jersey to be abandoned, and have been more or less hanging out with Bland, working and doing shows ever since. My first real trial by fire was when the Ramblers got a call from the playwright Sam Shepard very early in our career in the 80s to take a look at his play that he'd just written, Lie of the Mind, and see if we didn't want to play the music for the production that was going to open off Broadway. And I'd never read any Sam Shepard, I'll admit it. So I quickly read as many of his plays as I can, and Tommy Thompson, the founder of our band, went to New York together and had a meeting with Sam, and at one point in the meeting Tommy asked, well, what music do you think we ought to do for this show? He had described that we would be on stage with the actors and play music between the scenes and underscore some of the scenes, and it would be somewhere, a booksicle, I think is the name that got invented, somewhere between a musical and a play. And he said, well, just write them. And he mentioned 3 or 4 things that we did that he liked that made him think of us to do the job. And Tommy and I went away from that meeting and read a few more Sam Shepard plays. And Tommy was already a pretty well-established writer. He'd written a lot of good songs, mostly novelty songs, not really appropriate for the Sam Shepard thing, but he said, well, come on, we'll write some songs. You go start one and I'll go start one. And so I immediately, after reading the Sam Shepard plays, wrote a grisly murder ballad that I got about halfway through and then ran out of steam and had to have Tommy finish this grisly murder ballad for me, and a science fiction love song that was seemed Sam Shepard to me. I don't know why. And just by my own really good fortune and luck, he liked 4 or 5 of the things that we wrote. They went into the play, and as we ran that show for I can't remember how long it was.
It was most of that
half
season,
a year.
the 85, 86 season.
We started working on other musicals, and we had some opportunities, and I've kind of been in that game ever since. And what I like about...
No more welding.
I tried welding a few weeks ago, and I burned a hole in the pipe I was trying to weld. So I think I've lost my accreditation. But the thing that Sam did that really jazzed me up for collaboration and got me going is the huge responsibility to try to succeed with what he was suggesting on the one hand, and the full faith by him and the other people that we were involved with that you could do it, it would work, and it would be fine, is kicked me out of the cat with the claws out thing, because if you have someone of that stature and huge personality assuming without question that you will succeed doing something that has a huge impact on your energy and your diligence and the pleasure that you derive from finishing something that's useful. So I really, from that point on, and when the actors came in, and they were all Harvey Keitels and Amanda Plumbers and Geraldine Pages, and on, and Sam obviously was pulling the same trick on all of them, as well as all the designers too. It was very tribal, and it had an extremely unified feel, just because everybody was sent off like a buzzsaw by whatever it was that Sam did to me and others. Just his confidence in the people that he had gotten to do it, and you know, he may or may not have had a clear picture of what the final product was going to look like, but we all believed that he did, and we couldn't quite put our finger on what it was, but we were going for it like crazy, and it just, and in musical theater, and since that time, just collaboration on every level where the unified goal is so much bigger to the individual than the wonderful little idea I get in my pajamas, you know, at a certain point. I don't think I could write songs, just sit down and write a song. I can't do it, but write a song where two mothers who can't find their sons, this is one that Bland and I wrote, two mothers can't find their sons and they're a little upset, so they come on stage, and by the end of the song we want them really angry and the audience standing up and cheering. We can do that because we know what it is and where it's going, but if you just tell me write a song, it's like, okay, sure. I just can't do what you do. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Wow.
I want to talk Mary, a little bit about the Ken project, the CD, the album Ken that Mary and Rodney Crowell. Rodney's one of the great songwriters in America. I was going to say in Nashville, but all of America. If you don't know the 7-Year Ache, you need to. It's one of the great ballads of desire.
He and Vince Gill wrote had written a song that I really loved called "It's Hard to Kiss Lips at Night That Chew Your Ass Out All Day Long." And
Roger Miller.
Isn't that great?
Yeah, I really love it.
He's in the Songwriters Hall of Fame between Guy Clark and Willie Nelson, I think, something like that. So he's one of those guys. Like I said, Rodney grew up, the only way I can say we grew up alike is that we both had bullet holes in our houses, you know, in the same little patch of East Texas, which is like the ringworm belt. And we just, I don't know, he had written a song in which he mentioned my name, and not just Mary, which, as I said to him, if you just said Mary, it would have meant nothing to me, but he said Mary Karr, like the whole name. It's like I had a guy get my name tattooed on his arm once, and I said, but it's just Mary, that could be anybody. I mean, you know, you need the whole sucker in there for it to get register as me. And we became kind of great friends around our shared misery, I think, growing up in this little rat hole. And he kept saying, I want you to write songs with me, I want you to write songs with me, and I kept saying no, no, no. And then we were on the phone one day, and we were talking about how we both were in high school. And in high school, Rodney played football, and he was like the cute guy, and he was in a band, and blah, blah, blah. Well, I was a complete Dortberger who dated guys who went to prison. And I said, yeah, you know, they had a saying about me, if the law don't want you, neither do I. And he said, that's a great name for a song. And I said, you know what, I'll give it to you, it's yours, you can have it. You write that song, then you buy me dinner when you win a Grammy. And he said, well, why don't you write some lyrics to go to that? Why don't you see what you could, if you can't write a couple of couplets? So on the phone, I came up with a couple of lines. If you ain't chugging your paycheck, you ain't hugging on my neck. If you ain't running from the past, you ain't making my heart beat fast. And he came back with a melody with that thing, kind of around those lines in that song, if the law don't want you, neither do I. And the next thing I knew, he was in my apartment in New York with a guitar in his knee like 10 days later, and we were working on songs. And we could write like 2 songs a day. It was like the easiest thing I'd ever done. I understood suddenly why they call it playing when musicians get up on a stage. You know, I understood why music is, to me, the ultimate art. It really is. I think there's a famous line by a Renaissance, or by a critic named Walter Pater from the 19th century that says all art aspires to the condition of music, and I think that's true. So we're writing all these songs, and I was on the road for a book, and he was trying to write a book for the first time, and so I would be in San Francisco, and he'd be in Berkeley playing a show, and we'd get together, he'd come to my hotel, and we'd work, and we'd write a song in a day, and then I'd meet him, and he was in Austin, I was in Houston, and we met in Dallas, and we'd write a song. Well, after about a year of this, he said, well, we got a record contract for our record. I was like, what record? He says, we're making a record of these songs. I said, oh, of course, Dookie, we are not either. I'm not making, are you serious? I sort of was just doing this because it was fun to do. And he kept saying our record, and I thought it was like a joke. And then he said, well, we have this record deal. You know, a lot of these songs are sung by girls. I can't sing them. And I said, well, if you were more confident in your masculinity, you could. But the next thing I know, he signed up Lucinda and Emmylou and Nora Jones and Leanne and Miss Roseanne Cash to sing these songs. And so he really backed me into it. I was really, I'd never done anything like this. And I was like, I've never had that much fun in my life as being in a studio. I've always had friends who were songwriters and musicians. I'm from a very musical family. My mother, I listened to opera, she listened to Bessie Smith. I grew up in the blues belt and grew up listening to good blues and going to bars. And I was always kind of had friends who wrote songs, but I never kind of imagined that I would be able to do that. So I was like just big-eyed and blinking kind of the whole time. I would like to say that I was, you know, some great musical contributor, and then touring with it was like nothing I'd ever done. So I really, you know, after that I was like, well, sure, I can write a TV show. Of course I can. Not me, who? You know, like, I don't know, I sort of, it's not something I imagined that I would do.
That's a great interview with you and Rodney, where you said, we wrote these songs, and then here came Emmylou and Nora Jones, and these wonderful voices, and you're rhapsodizing. And Rodney says, don't get used to it, Mary.
Yeah, I know. He said it's not going to be like this anymore. I said, really? You mean they're not going to be seeking me out to sing my songs for the rest of my life. My feelings are hurt.
You did pull, between you pulled an enormous amount of talent together for that project. If you don't know the CD, can treat yourselves to it. It's a wonderful collection, and it's one of the most popular CDs in the Americana.
We were number one. We were number one last year, ahead of both Dylan and Neil Young, which tells you how shitty the world is. And me and Rodney could be ahead of Bob Dylan and Neil Young and Springsteen, I think, in the same.
Take it, Mary.
Listen, listen, I'm gonna have a T-shirt printed. Wear that and nothing else, maybe, for the rest of my life. So.
Joy, what's been your experience with musicians as far as in film and television, scoring and so forth?
Actually, I'm executive producing a musical right now, which is shooting in New York. It's called Black Nativity, and it's based on a Langston Hughes song play that's really a gospel piece. And it's been totally rewritten and updated, but in preparation for the film, I started talking to some music supervisors who've done big movie musicals, like, say like Dreamgirls or Chicago, because this is more of a studio. It's Fox Searchlight, so it's not really a studio, but it's sort of a studio.
That's a studio.
Yeah,
I'm
I'll
talking
take
to
it.
them about a project. I'll take it.
So it's very interesting to me how this process tends to go. Is that for an existing musical like Dreamgirls, say, where they were going to add to the list of songs. They weren't going to use everything that was part of the Broadway show, but they were going to grow it. And so the songs are pitched out to lots of songwriters, very good songwriters, and on spec, all these guys write a song. And then they come in and they pick a very few. And for instance...
Out of how many would you pick? You'd have 50 songs, you pick 3, or you'd have... Really?
Yeah, just they cover the waterfront, really. And then same thing for arrangers. They'll just listen to a lot of sounds and try to get somebody that they think can, in this case, capture the spirit of an older time, but the music doesn't feel dated, which is sort of a knack. And so a lot of people work for free before there's ever a movie musical, and then stars actually can't approve their songs in a movie musical, which is surprising to me, having worked on a lot of projects where stars could approve
everything.
The
trailer, the budget.
Their makeup artist gets paid more than most people on the set, you know, that kind of thing. So, so there's a kind of absolute necessity of having the right music, which has driven any musical movie project for good reason. But what I think has been so extraordinary, actually, about watching the music come into films, either now, you know, we're doing it at the origin stage now because we have a movie musical, but most of the time when I work on a film, we're getting a score after we've made the movie. And we've got what we call temp music in the movie to kind of flesh out what it's supposed to sound like. And then we actually have to go get someone who can, on our budget, make something of the same mood as the temp music. Something I've learned from this process is just how little change in music makes a huge change in experience of the audience. So unless you start in a kind of strong musical place where you establish strong as normal, you don't have very much range in most movies for developing a score. You're sort of locked in the neutrals.
I don't know what that means.
I guess what I'm saying is, you know, when you've got a track playing under a scene, unless the track is very subtle, often the track will overwhelm the scene. And the scene becomes what the music is, not whatever else is happening in the scene. And so scores are generally the most problematic part of post-production. You usually wind up stuck, and you hire 3 composers, especially on an indie movie where your budget isn't so lavish to hire whoever you want. And it's been been profoundly interesting to see how a movie that you've watched many times without music suddenly becomes a different animal just with that score.
Have you experienced the people involved in the making of the music becoming so attracted and stuck on the temp music that it's impossible for a composer to carry on? From our side, we hit that.
What's an example of that?
Well, we've had movie scores where or television projects where the temp music has been in for so long through development and through whatever, and it's always been in someone's mind. And
when you say temp music,
the temporary music, like they will pick a Mary and a Rodney song to put in here, even though we know we can't use this, but this feels
As
right.
a placeholder.
It's a placeholder.
Got it.
And a lot of
people
times
get attached to
they
it.
get attached to it to the point where you can't write your way around it. You can't write your way back to the scene, or the scene and the music are inextricably linked together in the director or whoever's mind.
I was interested in what you were saying before about working with certain stars, and because I haven't been that involved in production other than being in the studios for Ken. I've written these TV shows and none of them have been made, but I was interested in what you were talking about actually.
You just want to hear an ugly story about collaboration. I started telling.
He wasn't going to tell this, but I'm going to put a gun to his head.
When my wife Lynn, when I told her I was coming in to do this, and I said, well, maybe I'll talk about Sam Shepard or Bill Irwin. She said, no, talk about someone really horrible that you had a terrible experience with.
This is what the story I want to hear.
So this was the Lone Star Love, which is a musical based on the Merry Wives of Windsor that we've had in development for forever, since I was a kid. And we had a Broadway production ready to go, and we were taking it out to Seattle to the Fifth Avenue Theater for an out-of-town run, and the new director and the new scriptwriter who was to punch up the script that we had met with, you said not to say his name, but I'm going to anyway. Well, I might as well. I already spilled the beans. Randy Quaid. They met with him and decided he would make a great Falstaff, and he had good credentials, and we heard a few warning things, but the producers were all about, we'll get a star. We need a star. We're going into a modest size Broadway house, the Glasgow. We need to run for X number of months, and we'll get a contract, and on and on. And it seemed okay to me. I thought he was a pretty funny Uncle Eddie or whoever that character was. I didn't know much about him. But he immediately started causing unbelievable trouble in rehearsals in New York. And
give it for instance.
Oh.
You see what I'm like, man.
Yeah, I do see what you're like. This is a mild for instance, and then I'll get to the bad for instance. He was tasked together with his wife, who is an amazingly crazy enabler of Randy Quaid, to make a short film that was going to go into the musical, where the Falstaff character arrives in the town of Windsor during a cattle stampede and bursts onto the scene. And this was to be like an old black and white kind of flickering, what do you call them, chyrons or something like that, that would lead to his actual entrance on the stage. And so he and his wife had fired all the low-budget, nice New York hippies that we had hired for peanuts to make this little movie, and brought in all these Hollywood people and made this thing that they wouldn't show anyone. And they said, well, okay, Jack.
What do you mean they wouldn't show?
They wouldn't show anyone.
They wouldn't show anybody else in the film?
No one could come. No one was allowed into the studio. No one was allowed into the mix. And so finally, during what was supposed to be the final day of mixing this thing, this was supposed to be like a $5,000 line item, and I don't know what they spent, but it had way more commas in it than that. So they said, well, all right, we'll show it to Herrick. He can come down and see it at the mix, and then he can report back to you. So I said, fine, I'll go. Because I seem to have gotten along with them okay, because why not? I mean, I'm supposed to be music directing the thing, and I need him to sing good. So she calls me, Evie, his wife, called me about noon and said, we'll be ready in an hour, and you can come down. And cutting to the chase, at 2:30 a.m. the following morning.
Oh my God.
They called again and said, okay, now we're ready. Now you can come down.
Oh.
And I'm blurry-eyed, and I couldn't get a cab because it's 2:30 in the morning in the Lower East Side, and so I walked to the studio. They're in there, blurry-eyed, in this unbelievable argument with each other about, I can't remember what the detail was, but Evie thought that Randy wasn't being properly presented in this little 45-second movie that they made. So they said, well, come on, you watch it, you see what you think. And so the movie starts, and superimposed on some old vintage footage of a cattle stampede was Randy Quaid sitting on top of one of the cows, kind of by the magic of editing, and charging into that. And it was just ridiculous. It had, you couldn't follow it or anything else. So they were trouble from that point on. But the story that you wanted to hear was with the costumers when we were out in Seattle in rehearsal for the show. I guess it was the first preview. Randy and Evie had decided that they would take over the costuming of him, and I think it was they were contractually allowed to do that, and he had come out in sort of an Elizabethan, skin-tight, kind of leotard-looking thing with a gargantuan codpiece attached to the front, and that was going to be...
Do y'all all know what a codpiece is?
Yeah,
Young people might not.
if you don't, you will.
It's a sock in your pants.
Yeah.
It's a sock in your pants.
Except this wasn't a sock, this was more like a bowling ball, and the producers were alarmed, and they had been reading the blogs for their reaction to the piece. Every night they would read the blogs about how people liked the rehearsals or the previews, and someone had written in that it shows pretty good that the Falstaff guy looks like he's got his understudy in his pants. So this was enough to shock them into sending me out to say, well, you're going to go talk to him and see if you can't get rid of this the codpiece, and also tell him if he wants to do that song in the second act without a shirt on, he needs body makeup, and a whole list of things. And I'm supposed to tell this guy, and really all I can tell him is, gee, Randy, you know. So we were sitting in the lobby of the theater on the nice carpeted stairs, and actually conversing pretty amiably about the codpiece, and he said, well, I could consider shrinking it, or, you know, but, you know, everything's this and that. And so we're just talking along, and like a tornado out of the back of the theater somewhere comes his wife, and just cut the meeting off and said, you know, you're not allowed to talk to Mr. Quaid without me being present and a bodyguard. And from that moment, and the cutting to the chase, the producers pulled out, the show was canceled, and the closing notice went up, and he never came back, and the understudy did the
rest of
the show, even though the audience gets to see Randy Quaid riding on a bull at the beginning. That was a horrendous collaboration, but it's not usually like that. And really, stars, in my experience, more of the mid-level, not movie star level stars, are some of the greatest people to work with. They depend on a music director for their security, and without the collaboration of the musicians and the director pumping them up to sing where they otherwise might normally wish they were talking instead, it would be hard for them to do it. And it's you know, and in musical theater, and one of the things you love about it is it's just all collaborations going in every single direction, and you know, I guess it's why it's so much fun, because it's like a buzzing beehive. But you know, eventually you make something, and if people don't like it, you still have a good time.
Yeah, exactly.
I want to say something about reacting to Joy's comment about the music can take over the scene in the movie. When we did the first of two movies with Sam Shepard, and Sam, one of the biggest stars as an actor in movies after being one of the most produced playwrights in the country, deservedly so in both scores. We had done much of the first score in our studio here, the beginnings of it, the structure of it, and then to finish it in New York. And then Sam had come here and worked with us, and he was working with us in the studio in New York. He, and I know Jack will remember this, he asked me to change a piano cue. It was about a 25-second cue, and I had a fairly fast figure going, and listened to it. Just a musical figure. I don't know, you know.
A series of notes.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, just a piece of music.
Yes.
Okay.
But it was repeated. It would went round and round for about 22 seconds, and that was the cue. And when we looked at it together, and with the picture, and we had recorded it, and the keyboard was in the control room, not out there. It was a digital keyboard. After putting it down, Sam said, "You know what? I think it needs to be slower." And he came over and he said, "Could you?" And Sam's a musician. He's a very fine drummer. He's a guitar player, and so he could talk with us very easily. It didn't have to be translated. He said, "Could we slow it down?" I think he sang a little bit of it. And I said, "Sure. We'll make it'll be that figure, but slower." So we did that. It took maybe 10 minutes, and he said, "Yeah, that's okay. I like that. I like it that way." And that was the last thing we did before we took a break. We've been going for 2 or 3 hours. And so the control room empties of us ramblers, and everybody go out to the drink machine. And Sam and I were the last ones in there, and he said, thanks for doing that." I said, "Sure, Sam." Everybody loved him because he was so gentlemanly. And
he's so beautiful to look at, too.
And we saw that, too. And
he could have me if he asked.
I said, and I started to walk around the piano, and he dropped his hand on my shoulder. He said, I need to tell you something." I said, "What?" He said, "There wasn't anything wrong with the piece you were playing. I didn't think there was anything wrong. I just thought it was too jaunty for what we were seeing, and the emotion needed to cool down a bit. So I just wanted you to know I didn't think there was anything wrong with your playing." I said, "Thanks for saying that, Sam. I'm good." I said, "Well, just wanted you to know." That's the kind of gentleman that he was, and that's the kind of leader in a theatrical collaborative scene for whom everyone will pull together.
That's what Rodney is like. Rodney is very much like that, and I saw him work with Vince Gill. At one point we were working on a song, and the one Lee and Womack wound up singing. And it was a slightly different song. And we were listening to it. I went through one time, and I had this look on my face after they'd been working on it for a couple hours, and Rodney said, "Can I talk to you alone?" I said, "Yes." And he said, "What are you thinking about this?" I said, "I don't know, it kind of sucks." He's like, "It does, doesn't it?" And then we start jacking each other up, about how shitty this song is. And he says, "We can't record this song. We just can't record this song." And he gets all head up, I'm all head up. I said, "Well, let's rewrite it." He says, "Now?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it'll be easy, come on, it's not that many words on the page. Sure we can, we could rewrite this whole song." And so we sort of rewrite the song, in about 20 minutes, literally 20 minutes. It wasn't even a real break. It was like somebody went out to pee. And so we go back in, and they play that through once, and it sounds better, but then he turns to Vince Gill and essentially says, "Come up with a great guitar riff that will make this not be stupid." I mean, essentially that's what he said to Vince. And Vince just pulled out of the air this amazing little guitar riff that all of a sudden gave all this volition or velocity to everything that came after it. And I realized that the way that y'all talk to each other, musicians, which to me was completely they could have been speaking Urdu. They'd say to each other, "Play that now with more hair on it." And they would all look at each other "Yeah, okay," or he'd say, "Play it slower, but with the same number of notes." Or play it with fewer notes, the exact same thing. And I'd be like, "What are you talking about?" I mean, but I started to be able to translate this enigmatic language that y'all talk to each other. It began to make sense to me. I became afraid suddenly that I'd sort of been absorbed into this universe where y'all talk in this magic language.
Did you start to speak it?
No. I was just an old maid school teacher sitting on the floor.
You'll speak it now.
You will. You're speaking it.
You think so?
Yeah.
But I was actually telling them to put shit in and take it out. They had this very great mandolin player, very famous Nashville mandolin player, who also played the cello, I mean, this amazing string guy. I mean, who was just really mind-bending. You know, when the final recording came out and you listened to it, it sounded like a pizza commercial. I don't know how to tell you. It sounded like, that's DiGiorno. I mean, you just hear it. And I just thought, there's something wrong with me, you know? And so I got home and I had the mix and I was playing it for my son. My son, who's very musically smart, plays drums, plays bass, plays saxophone, plays a bunch of instruments, listens to it and says, doesn't it sound like a pizza commercial? That's it, goddammit!
That's what they're doing.
And I'm on the phone with Joe Henry saying, Joe Henry, take that fucking middle out. It sounds like a pizza commercial. And they did. I couldn't believe it. Poof, I'm a producer, right?
If you're directing Joe Henry. The last song on this wonderful CD album that Mary and Rodney Crowell did is called "Hungry for Home." So that's a little bit of home out my way.
There we
Really nice,
go.
Bland. Thank you.
And to stay with the CD for a moment, we've got some folks from my collaboration class
Let's go. Mama's on a roll.
by Rodney Crowell and Mary Karr.
Rodney Crowell.
Mipso.
Mary Karr and Rodney Crowell, goddammit. That little bit steel rip, right?
Daddy loves Mama like he's spreading on molasses thick. Mama thinks Daddy's just a backwoods cornbread hick. Mama plus Daddy equals trouble when they start to drink. Me and little sister pouring liquor down the kitchen sink. Mama's on the road. Daddy's looking old. Mama's on the kick. Daddy's looking sick. Daddy goes out fishing and he takes me with him now and then. He likes to wake me early with a camel and a poor boy grin. Me and my sister thinking Mama's running way too high, cussing out at Daddy in the middle of a parking lot. Oh, Mama's on the road. Daddy's looking old. Mama's on the kick. Daddy's looking sick. It's the same old song, same old story. Waking up the neighbors in a